So last night, somebody asked me about this book, The Assassination of Julius Caesar by Michael Parenti, one of my favorite books. And I referenced part of the reason that I like this book is it's not simply history, it's what they call historiography. Right? If you were a history major in college, not only do you take courses on the history of Europe, the history of Asia, modern history, classical history, you also take courses on what they call historiography, which is how history is researched, the method for researching history. Method is important. And it's been said before that a great leader doesn't simply teach you what to think or tell you what to think. They teach you how to think. And that tonight, for my opening remarks, I thought I would just jump into learning to think as a hero thinks. Imagine that. Think as heroes think. That's what I called the stream for tonight. And the first thing to say is actually one of the most important points, which is how dare you? How dare you, Caleb, try to tell us how to think? And that's the point. How dare I? How dare I? How dare I tell you how to think? Well, you don't have to do what I say. And maybe it sounds grandiose for me to get on here and tell you how heroes think. Maybe it sounds grandiose and self-important, but I'm doing it anyway because I think I have something important to contribute to the conversation. And that is one of the first points. You have to dare. You have to be willing to go out of your comfort zone. You have to be willing to endure other people's disapproval. I think I can show you a new way to think. And I think I am qualified to do so. And I'm willing to endure somebody on the other side of the screen saying, who does he think he is? Well, I think I'm somebody who has something to say. Now, if you want to know my resume, I'm from a small town in Ohio. And when I was in college, I got involved in the struggle against police brutality. I videotaped 2 women being beaten up by the Cleveland Police Department. My video got them acquitted in juvenile court. I was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. I was the press spokesperson for the International Action Center of Ramsey Clark during the Occupy Wall Street protests, representing them on international television. I risked my life on a humanitarian mission in 2015 that created an international incident, bringing medical aid to the nation of Yemen on the Iran Shahid, which was a Red Crescent Society of the Islamic Republic of Iran ship. I have been an international TV broadcaster, appearing on different TV networks for the last decade. I've interviewed and interacted with multiple presidents. I sat down with Ibrahim Raisi, the Iranian president at the United Nations, for an exclusive interview. I've had a direct interaction with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I've had one-on-one conversations with the son of the president of Nicaragua. I asked Donald Trump a question at a press conference that he answered. I've done some stuff. I've been some places, done some things. I wrote a book that created a big scandal and was a big topic of conversation during the 2024 election cycle. A book that I wrote about Kamala Harris was banned from Amazon, and then it exploded and sold like crazy. I've done some shit. Been some places, gotten some stuff done. If you want to know more about who I am, you can visit my website, CalebMaupinBooks.net. So I think I'm qualified to tell you how to think, not to tell you what to think, but to tell you how to think, to teach you methods of thought that can enable you to do great things. I feel like I've done some great things in my life. Am I flawed? Sure, just like any of you, but I feel like I'm qualified to put forward some thoughts toward thinking as heroes think. So on that note, we'll jump right into it. Think as heroes think. The first thing I want to say is that your thoughts are the most important thing that you have. Your thoughts belong to you. And it is your thoughts that shape your behavior, your interactions, your life goals. Your thoughts are really important. Your thoughts are really, really, really important. And we forget that. In fact, a lot of people don't even realize how important their thoughts are. Your thoughts are very, very, very important. The way you think, the way you interact with the world, the way you think about yourself, the way you deduce information, the way you make plans, that's really, really important. And it's your job to own the most important thing you have, which is your thoughts. Because many people, they have their thoughts and they just think about whatever. They just go with the flow. They don't think about how to think. And as a result, they just think whatever. And they're missing out. And I think the first thing is you need to consciously decide to take ownership of your thoughts. Decide that you will think in a way that will lead you to do important and successful things. You need to decide that I'm going to think in a way that is best for me, that leads to my happiness, that leads me to connect with other people, that leads me to learn. You have to make a decision. You have to own your own thoughts. And your thoughts are yours. You can think however you want. You can't say whatever you want. If you say the wrong thing, you might offend people. You can't do whatever you want, but you can think whatever you want. Your thoughts belong to you. Your thoughts are your own. However, if you don't take ownership of your thoughts and you don't take control and say, I am going to think as I choose to think, you're missing out. And just because your thoughts are your own doesn't mean you should think whatever comes naturally to you. It means that you should consciously make a decision. I am going to think in a way that is successful. I am going to think in a way that is important. And there's a matter of input output, right? And this is tricky a little bit. But, I told you all years ago that I start every day by listening to classical music and I end every day by listening to classical music. I started doing that about 12 years ago. And it was a big game changer in my life. It made me a much happier person, a much more clear-headed person, because every morning I took my phone out and I put on some classical music. Every night before I went to sleep, I took my phone out, I put on some classical music, and it just kind of centered me. And that thought is very much a matter of input-output. If you watch television all day, what you've seen on television impacts how you think. If you read books all day, what you read in those books impacts how you think. If you're around other people, the people you're around impact how you think. Human beings were like synthesizers, right? We take our environment and we take it into our mind and we process it, and our creativity and what comes out of us is largely us taking in the environment around us, synthesizing it, processing it, and regurgitating it. And if you can understand that that's what you do, you need to consciously take control of the process. Decide what you're going to consume, decide what you're going to watch, what you're going to listen to, who you're going to spend your time with. Make a decision for yourself, but make that decision not based on whatever. Make that decision based on what you want to be, who you want to be, what you want to think, how you want to see the world, how you want to interact with other people. Take ownership of your mind. And it's weird because, in a way, this sounds authoritarian, this sounds totalitarian, but it's up to you. This is actually the greatest exercise of individual choice and freedom that you can make. Freedom is not just going along with whatever's happening. Freedom is not just going with the flow. Freedom, ultimately means making a decision and exercising and enhancing your own willpower in order to carry out that decision, saying, I want to be this. I want to do this. I want to be this way, and doing it. That's freedom. That is the ultimate freedom. If someone else comes to you and tells you how to be, that's not freedom. But if you just go along with the flow and you don't take ownership, that's not really freedom. Freedom is asserting individual willpower. And if you want to think as heroes do, as people who change history do, as great individuals who have changed the course of history do, you have to make a decision to take ownership of your thoughts and of your mind. And one thing that's important to do, and this might sound contradictory, is in order to do this, you have to get over the arrogant individualism that gets in the way of this. Now, that sounds contradictory, and so many things in our modern world are contradictory, but I'll tell you a story. When I was a high school student, I was very interested in socialism and communism. And one summer, I signed up for a creative writing workshop at Wright State University in Southern Ohio. I went to the creative writing workshop, and there's one of the teachers at the creative writing workshop introduced himself by saying, I am a socialist. I was very excited. Wow, this guy calls himself a socialist. And so I said, are you a Trotskyist? He said, no. I said, are you a democratic socialist, like a social democrat? He said, no. I said, like, what kind of socialist are you? He said, I have my own ideas. I have my own ideas. I've thought of socialism in my own way. That's the kind of socialist I am. And I said, well, geez, are there any socialist books that you can recommend? Nope. I have my own ideas. Are you a member of any socialist group? No. I'm just, And I found that to be really, really, really annoying. This guy, in his intellectual arrogance, claimed to be a socialist, but he could not tell me where he fit into the socialist movement. He could not point me toward any socialist writers because he thought for himself. And I find that there's so much of this. So many times I'd be passing out leaflets and I would try to hand someone a leaflet. No, I can't read that because I think for myself. And it's really annoying. And it is part of this culture that we have that in order to be a great individual, in order to be a free-thinking American, you can't have the humility to admit that you learned anything from anyone else. And that might seem individualist and bold on the surface, but it's not. Because all the people who think for themselves think the exact same thing. And it's a really, really obnoxious thing. If this guy had said, I'm a socialist, and I said, are you a Trotskyist? And he'd said, well, I've read some Trotsky. I agree with this. I don't agree with that. I would have respected that. If I had said, are you a socialist? And this guy would have said, sure, I really like Bernie Sanders. I would have respected that. But nope, I'm a socialist. And I have my own ideas. I think for myself. It's the most annoying thing. What that really means is he just picked a label and didn't think about it very deeply, didn't dig into it, didn't really do any serious research, and was just, a conforming individual who happened to pick a colorful label for himself. And that arrogant individualism is everywhere. If you really want to be a hero, you have to learn. You have to learn. And you have to join. And you have to investigate. And you have to make mistakes. And that people have this arrogance in their minds that in the name of being a great individual, I won't learn from anybody. I won't investigate anything. I won't join any group or any organization. I won't go out and take any risks or make any mistakes. I will just sit here and pretend I'm smart. Now, I see this a lot, especially with young men. And a lot of them think it's like a pride thing. I can't admit that I learned from anybody. I can't humble myself by being part of a process with somebody else. And they think that it makes them really strong, and it's actually an expression of weakness. That's what it is. Because all the great people of history learned from other people. And all the great people of history joined mass movements. And all the great people of history took risks. And all the great people of history made mistakes and learned from their mistakes. And that this pride that people have, this weird individual arrogance of like, I'm so free thinking, I can't learn from anybody, I can't join anything, I have to preserve my free thinking individualism. It is a weird aspect of Americans, right? Americans, I think Mark Twain said America is a great country because Americans have the ability to think whatever they want and say whatever they want, but they have the common decency to do neither. And he was, of course, being ironic there. But there's something about this. It's like if you were to actually take a serious stand on an issue, if you were to actually investigate, if you were actually to go against a prevailing view, somehow then you lost your individuality. Well, no, that's what great individuals do, is they investigate. They learn about things. They join organizations. They take sides. They get involved. They go out, and sometimes they learn in the process, and they make a mistake, and they change their position. That's what great people do. And that if you're sitting there going, I'm great, and you don't do any of that, you're not really great. And in fact, one thing that all the great people of history have done is they've learned from as many places as they can. A lot of people have this bias in their minds. I can only learn from people who agree with me. I can only learn from people that I like. I can only learn from my friends. I can only learn from Americans. I can only learn from... And that's not the correct way of doing things. In fact, you can learn a lot from your enemies and your opponents and people that are going against you. If there's someone that you really don't like, someone you really don't like, but they're very popular, find out why. Right? You already don't like them, so their negative attributes are very apparent to you, but some people do like them. And so it's a challenge. And if there's somebody out there you really don't like, but they really have a mass appeal, go figure out why they are liked. Find out what it is that you don't like, you don't see that these other people see. Find out what these other people find winning about the other person. And if there's somebody out there who does not like you and is critical of you, in a way, you're lucky, because you will hear from that person, if they're really honest, they will point to some of the weaknesses that maybe your best friends and admirers and people who love you won't see. And that often we refuse to learn from people that we don't like, right? We say, oh, we don't like this rival we have. We don't like this person who doesn't like us. And so any knowledge we could gain, any insight we could gain from that person. Look, Hitler was an awful person, mass murdering dictator. But you know what? If the sky was blue and Hitler said the sky is blue, that did not make the sky not blue. People that are bad and flawed and evil can still say true things. And that often we get it into our minds that we can only learn from people we like. We can only learn from people that are sympathetic or friendly to us, who like us. We can only learn from people that are similar to us. We can only learn from our own time or our own point of reference. You have to be able to learn from anybody. And that is a really important thing. The most successful people in this world tend to learn from anywhere they can. They tend to gain any insight that they can get. Now, I mentioned before that human beings are like synthesizers, right? That we're kind of a product of our environment. And that gets back to the whole quote from Friedrich Engels that I frequently will reference on these streams, right? Friedrich Engels said, the difference between man and other animals is that other animals simply interact with their environment, but man masters his environment and forces his environment to serve him. And this distinction sets man apart from all other animals, and that it is labor that brings about this distinction, that human beings, we interact with our environment and we change it. That the world goes into our minds, and we take the world and we alter the world around us and we change it. That is a uniquely human thing. No other species can do it. And I've been talking a lot about living biologically, right? That's a phrase we've used in CPI, that, an ant is alive, a tree is alive, a sheep is alive, a weed in your garden is alive, but it's not alive in the human sense because it doesn't master its environment. It doesn't dig with big questions. It just kind of goes along with things, right? It avoids pain, it seeks out pleasure, and it just goes along a predetermined path, never making conscious decisions, never asking big questions. Why am I here? Just kind of going through the motions of the world. And we call that living biologically, because something that does that is biologically alive, but it is not spiritually alive. It is not alive in the truly human sense. It is only living in the biological sense. It is not living in the spiritual or the human sense. It is living biologically. And there's a quote about this that really illustrates the exact same point. This is Wallace D. Wattles. He writes, there are two mental attitudes that a man may take. One makes him like a football. It has resilience and reacts strongly when force is applied to it, but it originates nothing. It never acts of itself. There is no power within it. Men of this type are controlled by circumstances and environment. Their destinies are decided by things external to themselves. The principle of power within them is never really active at all. They never speak or act from within. But the other attitude makes a man a flowing spring. Power comes out from the center of him. He has within him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. He radiates force. He is felt by his environment. The principle of power in him is in constant action. He is self-active. He hath life in himself. And that's Wallace Wattles basically explaining what I'm getting at. Some people are living biologically. They're like a football. They're pushed around and they react to the world around them. And some people have the power of life within them, and they force the environment to react to them. And the people who change the world, the great heroes of history, are people who force the environment to react to them, force the environment to serve them, who assert their willpower onto the world. And it's a challenging thing to do because everything is being done in our world today to just lull you to sleep. With our phones, with social media everywhere, with the popular culture the way it is, everything is being done to just kind of lull you into this biological state of existence. And it's almost a daily battle to assert your ability to be this way, to be like a flowing spring, to let power come out from the center of you. But that's really what being heroic is about. And I can point to some great examples of this, but really one thing that it really gets down to is passion. passion. There's something that people believe. They say one should never be a fanatic. Have you ever heard this before? Never be a fanatic. Never be fanatical about anything. Well, if I had a heart attack and they called 911 and I was being rushed to the hospital, I would want the doctor who worked on me to be a fanatical doctor. I would want somebody who knew the human body and human anatomy fanatically, and they knew just how to give me exactly the right treatment to make me better. And if I was going into business and starting a business and I wanted to market my business, I would want to hire a fanatical marketer, somebody who knew exactly how to market my business and get me as many customers and make me as much money as possible. And great things in this world are achieved by fanatics. But there is this socialization that we all go through that says, don't be fanatical. That's weird. Well, being a hero is weird. Most people are not heroes. Most people don't have a great impact on the world around them. A lot of people are just going through the motions. But if you want to be heroic, you have to learn to be a fanatic. And whatever this social stigma, don't be a fanatic, don't believe in stuff, don't be passionate, don't dig into issues, don't think deeply about things, whatever that is, you have to overcome that. And you have to let yourself learn to be passionate about what you want to do. And you have to let yourself dig in and become fanatical. And that's part of that, getting over that arrogant individualism. It's part of how dare you. It's part of everything I've been saying so far tonight, is that if you really want to change the world, you cannot be a conformist. You cannot be the type who is afraid to stand out. The people who change the world stand out. The people who change the world are outliers. They are the exception. They are not the rule. And if you're not willing to be the exception, and if you're too scared to be passionate, if you're too arrogant to deeply research things, if you have your own ideas, you don't read books about things, you're not going to change the world. And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. But it's true. And what you need to do, and this is a hard one for a lot of people, is that you have to learn to enable your passion to carry other people. A lot of people can let their passion carry them. That's easy. It's very easy to let your own passion carry you. But if you really want to change the world, you have to learn to let your passion carry others. Great example, Napoleon. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica. He joined the French military. But we all know that Napoleon became the emperor of France. He became the leader of this modern empire that came out of the French Revolution. And how did Napoleon do what he did? Well, what did they call Napoleon? What was one of his nicknames? They called him the 100,000 man. Because with his passion, he was a very passionate, fanatical individual. He carried 100,000 people, a huge army. With his passion, he was able to motivate and carry thousands and thousands and thousands of other people. And that's what you have to learn to do. It is one thing to let your passion carry yourself. A lot of people aren't even willing to do that. A lot of people are too socialized too over-socialized to even be passionate about anything that their boss doesn't give them permission to be passionate about, that their teacher or CNN doesn't give them permission to be passionate about. Not only do you have to learn to let yourself truly be passionate and truly be fanatical about things, but you have to learn to let your passion flow through you and carry others. Not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do. But if you want to change the world, that's what you have to do. And if you look at great people throughout history who have changed the world, this is something that they do very, very well. I'll point to a few examples while we're here of people who've changed the world. One of them is a person that I greatly, greatly admire, and that is Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi was born to a very impoverished family in Libya. He did not know his birthday because there were no calendars. His family were Bedouin. He was raised by Bedouin. He did not know his birthday. And Colonel Muammar Gaddafi joined the military, was a leader of the Libyan military. When the oil workers went on strike, he was a leader of the patriotic officers of Libya, and they seized control of Libya. And under Gaddafi's leadership, Libya became a socialist country. And it saw its living standards and conditions of life rapidly increase. Universal literacy, universal housing, the highest life expectancy on the African continent, the great man-made river, the world's largest irrigation project. And Libya was carried by the passion of Gaddafi. With his dedication, with his fanaticism, with his obsession with making a strong country out of this North African desert country that he lived in, he transformed the lives of millions and millions of people. And Gaddafi sent support to the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. Gaddafi sent support to Nelson Mandela. He sent support to the Black Panthers in America. The Libyan Revolution had an impact worldwide, but in his own country in particular. It really, really made a difference in people's lives. And it was with his passion, he was able to carry a whole nation. I have recently been highlighting the great Jerry Healy, the leader of the Workers' Revolutionary Party of Britain, one of the Palestine activists who pioneered the Palestine movement. Under his leadership, Vanessa Redgrave, a member of his party, a famous actress, made a documentary film supporting the Palestinians that was shown all over the world. She gave an Academy Award speech condemning the Zionist hoodlums. And the more you read about Jerry Healy, I was reading one piece, they said no individual has ever carried an organization the way Jerry Healy carried the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And that at one point, all the British Trotskyists convened a meeting to condemn Jerry Healy. And over 1,000 people gathered in this auditorium to condemn Jerry Healy for what he was revealing about how the Socialist Workers' Party had been colluding with the FBI. And Jerry Healy shocked everyone by showing up with a dozen of his supporters and walking into this hostile territory. And they all gasped when they saw him. And even when he was so outnumbered, he carried a spiritual charge that was massive. And he went there and he demanded the right to speak, to answer those who spoke against him. That's the kind of power that we're talking about. Another great example of somebody who carried people with their passion was Joan of Arc. A woman who said she heard the voice of God, rallied the people of France to defeat the British, became the national saint, the hero of the French people, put on a suit of armor, that was made for men, led men into battle. You look at Joan of Arc, this is a truly remarkable person who, again, was certainly willing to be non-conforming, was certainly willing to buck the social norms of the time, was certainly able to carry other people with the spiritual charge and the energy that she had. In Mao's little red book, it says, "He who is unafraid of death by 1,000 cuts dares to unhorse the emperor." And it's people that are fearless, people that are bold, are able to do great things. I think about Stalin. Stalin, this young guy from Georgia who led the Soviet Union to become an industrial superpower, 1/5 of the planet industrialized, and defeated the Nazi invaders, invented space travel, global movement centered around the Soviet Union. You think about what Stalin achieved. It was pretty amazing. No country had ever rapidly industrialized that way. No country had ever withstood what the Soviet Union withstood under Stalin's leadership. And what Stalin did was epically amazing. And there's a reason that after Stalin died, Khrushchev unleashed his tirade against Stalin and worked really hard to try and convince the Soviet people that Stalin had been a self-serving tyrant. And there's a reason that Khrushchev's secret speech was so demoralizing and destroyed and devastated the global communist movement, because it was the spiritual charge, the energy, the passion, the fanaticism of Stalin that had largely carried a mass movement that changed the course of the world, really defined the 20th century. And there's other examples we can point to, right? This image is an image that has always stuck with me. Just put it on the screen here. Hold on. This is a famous image from the civil rights movement from Little Rock, Arkansas. An African-American teenage girl defying a mob of racists in order to go to school. Just facing down a huge mob of people that opposed her in order to assert her right to get an education. I look at this image, I think about people that I know that aren't even brave enough to say that CNN could possibly be wrong. People that aren't even brave enough to say that their professor's wrong about Russia. Aren't even brave enough to let themselves challenge or question U.S. foreign policy narratives. I think about this woman who was brave enough to face down a mob of people that hated her, wanted to kill her. Again, history is made by people that are passionate and willing to endure persecution for what they believe. Right? I think about Abraham Lincoln. There's so many stories of Abraham Lincoln. During the U.S. Civil War, people that were demoralized and hopeless would go into Abraham Lincoln's office, and they would come out full of energy, ready to go and defeat the slaveholders, and that Lincoln carried with him a certain energy and power. That's the power you have to learn to cultivate within yourself. If there's anything I want to tell you tonight, it's that if you want to think as heroes think, you have to be willing to get over the phobia of conformity. And you have to be willing to take control of your own mind. You have to say, my thoughts, my mind is the most important thing that I have. And I am going to learn to think in a way that will help me to achieve what I want to achieve. You have to take ownership of yourself. And you have to learn not to let your mind go in crazy places. You know, Xi Jinping, the leader of China, he says, the worth of any plan is in its implementation. A lot of people spend their time worthlessly making plans that are not realistic. This is a really, really frustrating thing that I've noticed. A lot of people make plans they have absolutely no intention of carrying out, that are not realistic, that don't match their own abilities. And they come up with plans that are not serious, plans that are not practical, and they daydream about them all day, and they don't actually carry them out. And there are other people who try to carry out plans, but they don't accurately assess what they are capable of doing. And so they fail. And that being successful in life largely means learning what you can do, learning your own abilities. What am I good at? What can I do? Picturing what you want to do and going out and doing it and making mistakes. And then going back to the drawing board and saying, where did I go wrong? And going out and doing it again. And that I have known many people who they are not capable of working around their flaws. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has flaws. And that a lot of people are ashamed of their flaws. They're ashamed of their flaws. And so they refuse to work around them. And I am very disappointed by this. For example, I used to have a roommate who struggled to get up on time, right? He just, his alarm would go off and he would push the snooze button. And every semester he would schedule an 8 a.m. class. Every semester. And I would say to him, what happened last semester? You didn't go and you ended up dropping the class. Maybe you should not schedule this. And then this shame would come over him. No, I have to learn to do it. I have to learn to do it. Well, he wasn't learning to do it. And so every semester he would go and make the same mistake again. He would fail again. Right? And I see this, right? That yes, you do need to force yourself to learn to do new things. Yes, you do need to challenge yourself. But if there's certain things you're not good at, there's no reason to keep running into a brick wall. But a lot of people do that. A lot of people just keep running into a brick wall because they're ashamed of running into a brick wall. They say, well, you know what? I need to be able to do something I'm not capable of doing. So rather than planning around their flaw or their shortcoming, they just keep slamming right into it out of shame. Well, admit to yourself, I have very sloppy handwriting. I admit that to myself. So do I try to do things that would require me to have clean handwriting? No, because I know I have sloppy handwriting. But some people are so ashamed of the fact that they have sloppy handwriting that they keep doing things that require them to have clean handwriting, telling themselves, no, I'm going to not have sloppy handwriting. And they just keep having sloppy handwriting. And I've seen this. People who don't work around their own limitations and flaws. It's a weird thing that it's like on the one hand, there are some people that refuse to overcome their flaws, refuse to get better. But there's other people that refuse to work around their flaws. And their flaws are a point of shame, and they are just unable to say, you know what? I am not good at certain things. I am going to figure out how to accomplish what I want to accomplish without doing things I'm not good at. And I've seen that, right? That really, and again, this is that synthesizing that I've said, right? A lot of life is looking at what you have, looking at the landscape and the rules of the game, going to the drawing board in your mind and saying, okay, I want to do blank. going out and trying to do blank, and maybe it doesn't go well, and then going back to the drawing board and trying again. That is so much of what life is. You have to be able to learn the playing field. You have to learn your own abilities. You have to learn what you have. You then have to go to the drawing board in your mind and make a plan. You have to then go try to carry out the plan, and you have to fail. You have to fail. You have to make a mistake, and then you have to be able to go in your mind and say, where did we go wrong? And then you have to go out and do it again. Right? And that process is probably the most important thing. You can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't have that process, you're going to fail. And you can be the most skilled and talented person in the world, but if you don't have that process, if you can get that process right, if you can assess your own abilities, assess the world around you, go make a plan, go try to carry out the plan, fail, figure out how you failed, and then go back and do the plan again and fail again and go back and maybe be successful, but go back and figure out how you can be even more successful. If you can go out and challenge yourself and say, you know what, I tried to do this, I wasn't successful. I tried to do this, I was successful, but I wasn't as successful as I could be, but I can try this. And then if you constantly learn new moves, you're like a dancer and you learn one move and you get it right, and then you learn another move and then you get it right, and then you learn another move and you get it right, and you learn another move and you get it right. That is a process that requires success, and it requires being willing to challenge yourself. It requires being willing to make mistakes. It requires being willing to accurately assess the world around you. It requires being able to assess your own abilities. It's a process, and that is the process. That is the process through which the world is changed. It's taking the world, assessing it, and determining in your own mind how you'd like to change it, going out and trying to change it, and maybe being somewhat successful, maybe failing, and figuring out why you failed and going back. This is the scientific method. This is how human beings have gotten from hunter-gatherers in the woods to space travel and iPhones, by going out and figuring things out. And it requires patience. It requires confidence, right? You have to be able to fail and not just hold your head in shame and be demoralized and say, okay, where did things go wrong? And try again. And you have to be able to fail or not get the results you expected and say, okay, that's frustrating, but I'm going to keep going. And you have to be able to say, okay, I'm getting what I wanted, but I can do better than this, and push yourself to do better. And it is a difficult process, but that is ultimately what it means to be human. That's what this whole quote from Wallace Wattles is about. Not living biologically, not being a football that just goes and whatever, but letting the principle of power within you be active. That means engaging in this process, radiating force, being felt by your environment, being self-active. And it's difficult, and it's not easy, but that's the process of changing the world. And I wanted to just end with one of my most favorite quotations. It's by somebody I don't particularly like. I really don't like the person who said this, but it's a great quotation, if I can just find it, right? It's a great quotation, and it makes sense that he said this. And there's multiple translations of this. This is from Friedrich Nietzsche. This is from his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra. And there are many different translations of this, but it says, one must be filled with chaos to give birth to a dancing star. One must be filled with chaos to give birth to a dancing star. What does that mean? Well, it points to something that Nietzsche was aware of that is true, and I will help you to understand that, is that the universe is defined by a struggle between chaos and order. There is order in the universe, and there is chaos. And Christianity believes, and most religions believe, that God is order, right? If you read, the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Well, in the Greek, the word for word is logos. And that the beauty of our universe is that our universe is full of chaos, but that chaos is constantly being put back into order. And then that order is being pulled apart with chaos. And then that chaos is being put back into order. And that's one of the beautiful things about the nature of the world that we're in. It's like there is a constant push and pull between chaos and order, chaos and order. But the bigger the chaos, the more beautiful and powerful and epic the order that comes out of it is. And that's what Nietzsche is observing. If you're filled with chaos, if there is huge chaos within your soul, if you can organize that chaos, you can give birth to a dancing star. Not everything in life is a matter of good and evil. Good and evil exist. Right and wrong exist, but sometimes it's a question of big and small. And if there is big chaos within your soul, that means there is the potential for big beauty. And that's one of the beautiful things about the world. And that too many people have learned to bottle up the chaos within themselves, to breathe in the chaos within themselves and try and contain it, rather than embracing the chaos within themselves and synthesizing it and packing it into a beautiful, beautiful dancing star. Too many people think, I've just got to be small. I've just got to be small. I've got to be small. I've got to be small. I've got to be small. Well, you don't have to be small. You just have to be big in a controlled way. If you're big in a chaotic way, that's very bad. That's insanity. But you can be big in a logos way. And you can give birth to a dancing star.